Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen, and with me again this week,
it's Ted Haycraft.
It's Ted Haycraft.
Cinema chat fan. No,
we're only a few seconds in. You're already plugging. Today we are discussing the Brian De Palma film, The Fury, with Sam Irvin. He was technically a production assistant on this film, but it was his first in a long series of movies that he worked on with De Palma as his assistant, amongst other jack of trades that he. But anyway, first, Ted, what did you watch this week? Anything interesting?
Well, I did watch a overlooked, obscured Paul Schrader film.
Which one?
Adam Resurrected.
I saw that on Letterboxd. If you're not following Ted and me on Letterboxd.
2004. Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
William Dafoe.
That's got a great poster.
Derek Jacobi. It's very strange. He is a carnival clown circus owner in Berlin between the wars, but he's Jewish. The war breaks open, and he gets thrown into a concentration camp with his family.
Is this the first one after Autofocus?
It is after Autofocus for sure, but I'm not sure if it's...
I remember there's a point where I did start
There's the Walkers in there somewhere too.
Okay, there was a point I trailed off with Paul Schrader until First Reform.
Well, he disappeared. The few of these, like the Walker and this one, they all kind of they got kind of lost in
the Bret Easton Ellis one with Lindsay Lohan.
So
the Canyons.
But anyway, it was interesting, and I'm going to go back to it because I'm trying to. I don't know for sure I figured it all out, but the concentration camps are in black and white, and it takes place in the 60s in Israel, in a asylum for concentration camp victims.
There's one movie I've been trying to find for a while. I think I'm just going to break down, have to rent, but a bunch of people have been raving lately to me is Blue Collar. There's an argument Blue Collar as Schrader's best movie, and I've never seen it. And
I must say, and I think you'll be happy to hear, the other thing I've been spending my time watching. Steven Soderbergh.
The Nick. I saw you posted you were The Nick. How
I posted it? Oh, did I?
You posted a picture of it.
Yeah. Soderbergh, he's the man. All hail Soderbergh.
It is it's his Berlin Alexanderplatz.
God, it's just there was like shots in there. I'm just like amazed, and there were scenes I got emotional that I don't think it was a scene to be emotional. I mean, as emotional as it was to me, but it just got to me, and his frame, and I know he's holding the camera and he's editing the thing. And the performances and the music.
The score is one of the best. I've tipped a movie with that score.
I mean, it's been done before, but the set electronic modern score set in New York 1900s.
Cliff Martinez, man, all the way. So the craziest thing about The Nick I remember is like you take the trope of a hospital show, and Mad Men also did this thing where it found a reason to do a historical, like to really deal with a current issue with a historical perspective. The Nick really deals with race in a very intriguing way.
Well, yeah, now I'm watching it now. It's like the race issue and the pandemic.
I didn't think about the pandemic.
Typhoid Mary.
How far are you in?
I'm done.
What'd you think of that? We're not spoiling it.
We should save this for a podcast. I think we do. We need on Soderbergh podcast or something.
We've done enough Soderbergh podcasts.
He deserves more.
The ending. I just wanted to we can't spoil the ending, but that is one hell of an ending to the show.
Even though, I thought, well, maybe he could come the other way.
All right. Anyway, I mentioned this last week because I was still kind of digesting it. I've been watching all these Criterion neo-noirs, and I finally dived into the Robert Mitchum. Was it not Sam Spade?
The Farewell My Lovely, the two
Farewell My Lovely and the Long.
And
The Big Sleep. Sorry, Long Goodbye. I was thinking they are, but.
Is it one Michael Winner or
yes?
Yeah,
and it's weird because it ends in a giant Uzi scene, which seems like I've never really seen any Michael Winner movies. Like I have Death Wish movies in the back of my head from like VHS, and Farewell My Lovely has like some major talent behind it. It's John Alonzo, pretty fresh off Chinatown. Dean Tavaleris is the production designer. It's one of Jerry Bruckheimer's first produced movies, and yet. This is the movie that seems to define why, Raymond Chandler and the detective genre became such a stereotype for a while and stiff to people, at least to me in my generation or whenever I came up.
Yeah.
I was hoping you would defend it for me.
No, because, I think I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't think I've sat through both of them, either one all the way through.
Okay.
They were one got really bad reviews. One of them, and then one of them got decent reviews, if I recall correctly.
The Big Sleep transposes everything into London,
Yeah.
and Candy Clark is in it, and so I
Right.
got excited about that. And like, the is it John who did the Hawks did the original Big Sleep, and
Yeah.
notoriously that's one of the most confusing plots of all time.
Well, yeah, it was like the plot doesn't matter. It's just the film is the characters and the actors and everything that goes on is wonderful.
Right.
But if you're concerned with the plot, it is like, what doesn't make sense or something. I need to revisit them. I'm telling you the truth. I need to revisit the Hawks, but I need to watch these things. So they were around, and I remember when they were in the theater, and I know Mitchell was getting long in the tooth, and
one of my favorite ones is Mitchum. A few years later, like many years later, he hosted SNL, and he did an SNL sketch where he did the voiceover in a detective speak.
Yeah, well, yeah, because he's always been associated with film noir. You go way back in that, Out of the Past.
Out of the Past, yeah. Out of the Past. I only watched for the first time maybe 8 months ago.
You were pretty. Hopefully, you were suitably impressed.
Blown away,
Yeah.
like one of the definitive femme fatales.
Right.
Like, wow.
But yeah, these were like, I don't know. I'm sure if you examine it, I think these might have come in the wake of the Agatha Christie films, or there were trends of doing these things. And I always thought the weird thing was that they're two Marlowe films, but I don't think they have any connection to each other.
Well, I think the trick of it is that the first one comes only like 2 years or a year after. Speaking of Marlowe films, after The Long Goodbye.
Right, that's
and Long Goodbye, I guess, didn't do well, and it seems such an antithetical movie to that.
Yeah. No, this is. I'm sure it was hopping on some trend, some nostalgic trend or something going on at the time, with that many stars and the people involved with it, and the studio involved. I'm sure there was something going on that instigated it, and I guess the second one was done because the first one did, I guess, okay, or they were going, let's try a dim, but put a different location or something. I don't know.
The Michael Winner one does have a cool opening and closing shot, mirrored opening and closing shot. But anyway, on to this episode. Ted, you knew Sam Irvin from the.
Well, I met Sam it was this great little show called Wonderfest in Louisville. It started as a model toy show, but they've incorporated a lot of different things. They bring in, people, celebrities and movie makers and artists and comic book things, and it's a nice little show in Louisville. I recommend it. It's usually around Memorial Day weekend, called Wonderfest. You can obviously look.
I think it's been mentioned on here
probably.
Times, yeah.
And Sam, there's this magazine called Little Shop of Horrors, and they do basically every issue is devoted to a breakdown of one major Hammer film horror. But the editor decided to do one on Frankenstein: The True Story, which is technically
you've mentioned this in a past episode.
Yeah,
too.
It's technically a Hammer film, but Sam is just a unbelievable expert on this film. He took over the entire magazine. He got this artist friend of ours, Mark Maddox, to do a fold-out cover, and the cover and the entire magazine article got Rondo Awards. That's an award they give out for Monster Kids give out. It's an internet thing, and they do the celebration, the award giving at Wonderfest.
Mm-hmm.
So Sam came, and we started talking, and he brought up Brian De Palma. So I just immediately leached onto him and said, tell me stories. And I had just amazing stuff. So I was, and of course I told you about him.
Yeah.
But he's much more to Sam than that. He was the executive producer. Well, we'll talk about this in the podcast.
We'll talk about this on
You'll
the
get
show.
a lot of his credits, but look him up. He's very prominent on Facebook. He'll be more than happy to be your friend. There's all kinds of stuff to get from him, and he's got wonderful stories, and you're going to hear some of that coming up.
He will be your friend. He was a very nice interview. Very nice.
It's great. Yeah, he's wonderful to hang out with.
Yeah. So anyway, onward with this episode. Wonderfest was Ted had mentioned knowing you from Wonderfest, and was the reason I wanted to do this, just because we've been looking for an excuse to do a De Palma episode for a while, right. And your story seemed kind of intriguing in that regard,
to say the least.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's start. Hold on a second. I want to show you. If you don't have this, you should get it. It's a entire magazine that I wrote came out last December, a memoir of my working on Dress to Kill. And originally it was just going to be an article in the magazine, but I wrote 13,000 words. I said, I can cut it down to whatever size you want. And they read it and they said, oh my God, we're going to devote the entire issue to a whole special issue just on that.
You're showing off, what's that, issue 4 of Boobs and Blood?
Boobs and Blood, issue 4. And it's, so the whole thing is my memoir of working on it. It's got 175 photos. It's a really cool magazine, and all the profits go to a breast cancer foundation. So it's a good cause. It's not on Amazon. You have to just go to the Boobs and Blood magazine website.
Okay.
There's a special, print on demand website that you can order it from. But it's definitely worth it if you're a De Palma fan and especially that movie. So,
okay. So going back, where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, and went to college at the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
And I was, majoring in film there at the University of South Carolina, and I was head of the film committee that ran a movie theater on campus. And I decided I was a huge fan of Brian De Palma back then in the 70s. And I loved Phantom of the Paradise. I loved Sisters. And I decided that we're going to organize a Brian De Palma Film Festival and show Phantom and Sisters and Hi Mom and Greetings and some of his early stuff. And so I booked everything and got it all lined up. And then my dad was in the movie theater business. So I was always, getting the trade papers like, Variety and Hollywood Reporter. And in Hollywood Reporter, they had the production charts. And it said that De Palma was in early pre-production on Carrie. And it had a phone number for the casting office of Carrie. So I just called it cold, and they put De Palma on the phone. And it was just insane. I mean, of course, that would never happen today. Now, this particular casting session, unbeknownst to me at the time, was turned out to be the most iconic, most famous casting session in all history of movies, because Brian De Palma and George Lucas were sitting together at a table reading every kid in town for Star Wars and Carrie. Every actor who came in read a scene from both movies. And then they fought over who would get, if they really liked somebody, they would fight over who was going to get them for their movie. And so anyway, they put De Palma on, and he was on a break or whatever. And I explained what we were doing. And he said, and they were, in LA casting, and he lived in New York at that time. And he said, I'm kind of broke. I really need some stuff at my apartment in New York. You can give me the airfare from LA to South Carolina for the festival, then to New York for the weekend, and then back to LA. I'll come for the triangle airfare. And I said, done. And so he came out.
Was the college paying for this, or how does this work? Or is this coming out of your pocket?
Our film committee, we ran this movie theater 365 days a year, even when it was out. And we had free movies Monday through Thursday, and they were usually more artier pictures, foreign films, independent films that weren't terribly commercial. And we would show them for free. And then on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we would show commercial movies and charge $1. And it was a 300-seat theater. And we, because it was cheap and on campus, it was just filled up all the time.
Wow.
And with money, we were able to fund the free movies and have money left over for special events. And so we had this in our fund to be able to pay for for the airplane tickets and bring him out, and to put him up in the hotel and the whole deal.
Sort of reminds me back. That's what we had a sort of a interesting financial setup with our movie series at U of E at my university. I guess back in those days, it was just a lot of film campuses did that. You know.
Well,
Yeah.
it,
And this is in the days before, people didn't have home video. There wasn't anything like that. This was the 75. So, if you wanted to see a movie, this retro house that we ran was like the place. It was, the happening place to go. And
was it open? Was it open to the public too?
yeah, it was open to the public, but the public had if you were a student, you had priority, and the public had to kind of stand in a line for standby. And 10 minutes before the show, we would start selling tickets to the general public as well. And but and it was 16 millimeter, and we would rent from Films Incorporated and Janus Films. Those companies, sub distributors that would rent these films to campuses and to military bases and that kind of thing. And so anyway, so De Palma comes out. I take him to my film class, one of the film classes that I was taking at the time, and he was drawing storyboards on the chalkboard and of his latest film that he had done called Obsession, that hadn't come out yet and wouldn't come out. This was December of 75, and it didn't come out until like August of 76. So we're many, many, many months before it even came out. And at that time, it was still under the working title Deja Vu.
Okay.
And he brought with him a little cassette recorder and popped in a cassette and started to play for us the newly recorded score by Bernard Herrmann.
Wow.
We, for a past episode, had Paul Hirsch on in celebration of his book, and he loved telling the story of recording the Obsession soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, Paul is so great. I love him so much. And he, and I have to check the timeline, but I'm pretty I know that at the time De Palma came out to South Carolina, in the early stages of prepping Carrie and playing us this Bernard Herrmann stuff from Obsession, he was talking about Bernard Herrmann was going to be doing Carrie. And of course, as we all know, very sadly, Herrmann did the Taxi Driver score for Scorsese, and just hours after the last recording session died. And I think that may have been, if I may have the month wrong, it was definitely 75, but I think it was December-ish 75. So, I mean, when De Palma was there, at any rate, when De Palma was there, Bernard Herrmann had not passed away, but very soon after that, he did pass away, which was just really tragic. But it's also just incredible to think of a Bernard Herrmann score for Carrie. Man, that would have been not to diss Pino Donaggio in any way, who did an absolutely phenomenal job, and it's hard to imagine Carrie without his score. But at any rate, it was pretty cool to hear this Obsession cues, 9 months or whatever before it opened to the public, and he was drawing, scenes from Obsession and how the music played into it and stuff. And it was just the coolest thing. And he came to some of the screenings and did Q&As. And then on Saturday night, we booked Phantom of the Paradise to be a midnight show. We told everyone to come in costume, and that the best costume would be judged by De Palma, and we give away prizes and everything. So all 300 seats sold out. Many, many, many people came in costume. He did the judging. We gave away the prizes. And then we start the movie. And if you recall, the very first shot of Phantom of the Paradise is the Death Records logo of the dead bird graphic. And the dead bird is rotating around, and there's no sound. And I race up to the projection booth and go, turn on the sound. What's going on? And the sound bulb in the 16 millimeter projector had burned out, and somebody fucked up and did not have any spares in the projection booth.
How could you fuck up and not have spares, man?
I know. Like, are you kidding me? And it's after midnight on a Saturday night. There's no store you can go buy one of these. and we had to refund everybody and send them home. And I thought all the goodwill I built up with De Palma up to this moment just got flushed down the drain. But this will tell you, this more than anything will tell you what Brian De Palma's personality is like. He thought it was absolutely hilarious. And in the years following, when I ended up working for him as his assistant and everything, he loved to introduce me to people and tell this story to embarrass me. And that's just the kind of guy he was. He very sardonic, and he loved to embarrass me. So it actually, maybe in a weird way, made me more memorable or something, or gave him, a hook to. But anyway, so that's what happened there. And that was 75. And then he ended up making Carrie in 76. And in the fall of 76, Obsession came out in August and did very well and got incredible reviews. And then Carrie came out a couple months later in October and was just huge at the box office, huge reviews. And of course, as you know, ended up getting nominated for Best Actress for Sissy Spacek, and Best Supporting Actress for Piper Laurie, which was highly unusual for a horror film. And, it was the film that propelled him into the big leagues in the way that his colleagues like Scorsese and Coppola and Spielberg and all his buddies had their big breakthrough movie. And Carrie was the one for De Palma to finally do that. So on the basis of that, then 20th Century Fox wanted to make The Fury with Brian directing, which at that time, was considered a big budget studio picture, which was the first time that Brian was making a film that wasn't kind of a, independently made movie and then sold to a distributor kind of thing. This was his first big studio project. And he was going to be shooting it in the summer of 77, which was between my junior and senior year. And he had given me his home phone number. And so I called him and begged.
How often did you use this phone number, by the way? Judiciously, I assume?
Yeah, I would never call him unless it was just like really, you just don't do that.
Right.
But in those days, there's no email, there's no other way to contact somebody other than phone or writing them a letter. I did have his address, but I did call him and called him cold and, at a decent time and all that kind of stuff. And he said, sure, come on up. And we're going to be shooting in Chicago. And, if you can put yourself up and, come on up and work on it. So I, held a gun to my parents' head and got them to spring for my hotel. And I went up to Chicago and worked on it I was a production assistant, but kind of his assistant. I hovered in his radius, and he would have me do things.
I want to ask, because I've known a lot of assistants for directors, and especially when they're young, like you sound like you were so in awe of this and so excited about this. And but at the same time, a lot of these assistants I've known as the years go on have had more love-hate relationships with the bigger director after a certain point. I was curious more about, like, you still seem to this day to be in awe and love with, or just his personality. Like, I wonder if you could speak more about, because I'm curious what De Palma is like personally, because he seems smart and sardonic, but he also seems like you could be the butt of a joke, I would think.
Yeah. He's a tricky personality. He's very hard to get to know. Even spending so much intimate time with him, over the years and everything, there was still a level that I didn't crack through, and he, he's not always the warmest person. When he's in a joking mood, it is sarcastic and sardonic, and you gotta take it. You gotta know how to take it. But at the same time, it didn't feel like it didn't cross over into that bullying thing. He always had.
Okay.
You always felt like it was, it was to have fun. Maybe at your expense, but not in a way that was, I don't know. You always felt like it was. I mean, Ted, you know how Mark and I, tease each other and everything. It was always in a friendly way.
Yeah, Mark and I do the same thing too. Mark's a artist. Just
What's Mark's last name?
Mark Maddox, and he does covers for Shout Factory DVDs and movie magazines. Okay. Fans. He's
won the Rondo Award for Artist of the Year 6 times. I mean, he's just this brilliant artist who does horror magazine covers and Blu-ray covers all the time for Shout Factory and stuff. Anyway, it's just one of those types of sarcastic relationships where you can needle each other, and it was hard for me to needle him back.
Okay.
A boss employee thing going on, but he was, he recognized that I was a, rabid film buff, knew my shit. I had been, studied Hitchcock. I mean, always a fan of Hitchcock and knew Hitchcock backwards and forwards. So we could have a conversation about that. And, we knew what each other was talking about, even down to the most tiny minutia sort of trivia or whatever. And so he respected me in that way. And, and I was an aspiring director. And so he was something of a mentor to a degree. Most of what I picked up was picking it up on my own by observing, watching, just soaking everything up. I mean, he wasn't taking time out to go, now, Sam, this is how you do that. He wasn't that type of a mentor, but he was open to letting me sit in on meetings. He would, take me to different meetings and things. And and by the way, on The Fury, I also, in addition to being an assistant, I was an extra in the
old Chicago amusement park scene.
Yeah, Chicago, that indoor amusement park, the scene where Andrew Stevens goes in with his telekinesis and throbbing veins in his head and makes everything go crazy. You'll see me in almost every shot.
I watched the a location journal, and I love the arrows pointing you out in each shot too.
It's ridiculous. So, but also I got an assignment from Cinefantastique magazine to write a journal on the making of the film. So it allowed me to request and be granted one-on-one interviews with everybody from Kirk Douglas, John Cassavetes, all the way, to John Williams when he was working on the score. I did a quick phone interview with him.
You didn't mention John Williams in this thing. That is very fascinating to me. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
Yeah, and I went, and even after we were finished shooting, I went to New York where they were editing the film on my Christmas break at the end of '77, and it went to the editing room and met Paul Hirsch and talked to him. And so anyway, it was just everything that I learned really about real filmmaking was not what I had learned in film school. I learned about, the thing about film school was really learning about older movies and studying films. But in terms of making films, my education was with De Palma. And he was just great in allowing me the access and recognizing that I was this sponge, wanting to be in on everything and wanting to know everything, and he didn't put up any roadblocks for that, and it was just fantastic in that way.
Have you read Julie Salmon's Devil's Candy about Bonfire of the Vanities?
Years and years ago, yeah.
There's a good description of him dealing with the DGA apprentice. Is that it's. I wonder if older De Palma is different, but he talks about, because it's union required to do it, but he was just telling them lining up shots and just all this stuff. And there was this really great sequence where he's talking about it's an overhead camera shot, and he's lining up all the extras to have umbrellas, and one person doesn't have umbrella, and he turns to the point, he's like, "Can you name the Hitchcock film I'm riffing on?"
Yeah.
Hey, can I want to interrupt, and I think before we go more into the theory, I think Sam, you should tell us, go back, and I think this is incredible, your fanzine, and how you got funded by your parents to go to England. Tell them a little bit about that. Well, how old you were doing this?
A horror fanzine called Bizarre, and it was I worked on it when I was in high school during the summer break, and I would do one issue a year, and they were very large issues, very comprehensive, like over 100 pages.
I mean, you got them sold across. I mean, it was really professional looking too, right? It was like sold across the country. I think I remember seeing those in a catalog somewhere.
Yeah, and I got it. They sold it at Cinemabilia in New York, at Larry Edmonds.
Did Bud Plant have them by chance?
Did who?
Bud Plant.
That rings a yeah.
Maybe.
And then there was a cinema store in London. I forget the name. They were selling it. And I heard from people. I mean, I met William Friedkin. It's so crazy. My dad took me to a theater owners convention in 70. When did The Exorcist come out? 74?
73, wasn't it?
73, somewhere in there. It was very shortly after The Exorcist. I went to this theater owners convention with my dad, and they would give away, they would give awards to whatever celebrity would say they would come. So the director of the year was William Friedkin, because I guess the studio said, you need to go rub elbows with the theater owners, and this will be good. And it was a pretty cool, they got great people. I mean, that year it was, William Friedkin was the director of the year. Faye Dunaway was the female star of the year. Jack Lemmon was the male star of the year. And, so I would go there, and they would, you could get autographs, you could talk to them. There was access. And I go up to William Friedkin, and I have my little Bizarre magazine with my, 5-star review of The Exorcist in there. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I got a copy of this at Larry Edmonds in LA." And I'm like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. And De Palma said that he had seen them. I don't think he bought them, but I think he flipped through at Cinemabilia before he met me, and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool. And they, back in those days, those cinema cinema bookstores were hotbeds. I mean, of film buffs. They were just like, you would make a pilgrimage to these places if you went to the big cities. And apparently, directors were hanging out there too. And so it was a great entree for me. And for my high school graduation, I convinced my parents to give me as a gift a trip to London where I could interview all my Hammer idols like Christopher Lee and all those guys. So and so I went there, and I had already been corresponding with Christopher Lee. I'd actually done an interview through the mail with him for an earlier issue. And so I had written to him and told him I was coming. And he said, "Oh, when you get here, give me a call and I'll take you to lunch." Well, when I got there, he said, "Well, I'm working. You're going to have to come to lunch at Pinewood Studios." And I go out there, and I don't know what he's doing, and it turns out he's filming The Man with the Golden Gun.
Wow.
He had been released for lunch early. So we had lunch at the commissary, and then just as we're finishing, in walks Roger Moore and Britt Eklund and Maude Adams and Guy Hamilton and Hervé Villachez. And Christopher Lee says, well, they've just broken for lunch, so we're not going to start shooting again for an hour. Why don't you come with me and I'll give you a tour of the Bond sets? So I had a private tour of the James Bond sets with no one else there. It was just completely empty, and we're just walking around. And then he asked me to stay the rest of the afternoon and watch them shoot. And then at the end of the day, he offers me a ride in the studio Rolls-Royce limo back to London, which of course I agreed to. And in the back seat is Christopher Lee and Hervé Villachez sitting next to each other. And I'm in the little fold-down seat facing them. And Hervé is 10 sheets to the wind, telling us these dirty stories of all the prostitutes that he's hired since he's been in London and what he's done to them. He has this very, very, definite lisp. And he was using the word pussy quite a bit, but it would come out pussy.
Okay.
Christopher Lee started to giggle at every time he would say the word pussy. And we just started to laugh, and it just was contagious, and laugh and harder and harder, and to the point where we were absolutely hysterical. And Hervé was having a great time because he knew, every time he would use pussy or another really raunchy word or something, that we would just.
How old were you during this?
Oh, I was like 17, I guess, something like that. And I was 74, summer of 74. So I was just about to turn 18. And, but at any rate, it was the most hysterical thing ever. And for me, this is Count Dracula, doubled over in hysterics. It was just surreal. So, and things like that just were continuing to happen the whole trip. I mean, I wanted to interview Diana Rigg because I loved her on the Avengers TV series as Emma Peel. I loved her on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the Bond film. But I really loved her playing Vincent Price's daughter in Theater of Blood. So she, her agents weren't playing ball. And so I found out that she was playing and starring in the West End as Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion. So I was like, well, I want to see that anyway. But it was sold out. But I figured, well, there's always somebody out in front of the theater selling a ticket that somebody couldn't come or whatever. And I went there, sure enough, got one ticket, went in. It was a fantastic seat. It was like 5th row in the orchestra center. And I sit down waiting for the show to begin. And I hear this very familiar laugh right behind me. And I turn around, and it's frickin' Vincent Price and his new wife, Coral Brown, who also starred in Theater of Blood. And by the way, they were introduced to each other by Diana Rigg. Mm-hmm. And before I can even open my mouth, Vincent says, Sam, what are you doing here? Because I was a groupie with him and had gone to see his lecture tours and everything many times. I'd been corresponding with him for years. And so he knew me, and he knew my magazine and everything. And I said, well, and I explained that I was wanting to meet Diana Rigg, and I was going to go to the stage door after to see if I could meet her. And he said, well, you're coming backstage with us. And that's what happened. And he took me backstage and introduced me to Diana, and we all had champagne, and it was lovely. And she was put on the spot, and Vincent saying, you're going to have to do an interview with this young man for his fabulous magazine. And she said, okay. And then it said, why don't you come back on my matinee day? Because I do a matinee and an evening show, and I just hang out in my dressing room between shows, and that's when we can do the interview. And I did, and it was fantastic. And so just charmed, weird things like that were happening the whole time. It was unbelievable.
You do sound like you were putting yourself into a position to be into the charmed, wonderful things to happen, though.
I was making it happen for myself, yes, but still, I mean, my God, the chance of Vincent Price being there at that particular moment. I mean, it's just still gives me goosebumps.
Mhm.
And there was something about Vincent Price because it happened over and over again. Years later in New York, my parents came up. I was living in New York when I was working for De Palma. My parents came to New York. They stayed at the Wyndham Hotel. I went to pick them up. We were going to go to dinner at the Plaza Hotel in the Oak Room. And we're coming down the elevator and it opens up. Vincent Price and Coral Brown step into the and again, he's like, Sam, what are you doing here? And I introduced him to my parents, and he goes, "Oh my God, I'm so nice to meet you. You have such a wonderful son." Blah blah blah. And my parents, they're like they're not particularly starstruck. They go, "Well, why don't you and your wife come with us to dinner at the Oak Room?" And so they said, "Well, we can't come to dinner, but we'd love to come and have a cocktail." So they came and had drinks with us, and it was just, again, it's like you could not. I mean, yeah, I make things happen, but that was just freaking crazy. It was just insane. Anyway, so that was the magazine, and once when I started going to college, I got really busy and working in the summers and stuff, so I really didn't have time to do the magazine. And then in meeting De Palma, I sort of, my focus kind of shifted where I really wanted to be spending my summer working on, films like The Fury and whatnot until I graduated. And then I wanted to be working in the film industry. So I kind of let the fanzine go by the wayside. But in doing the fanzine, I sort of legitimized myself in the world of fanzines. And the editor of Cinefantastique knew me, and he actually very kindly bought an ad for Cinefantastique in my magazine, Bazaar. And so we had kind of been in touch with each other. Fred Clark was his name. And so when The Fury came about, it was just a very easy phone call to Fred and getting an assignment to do a journal on the making of it. And they had done previously a cover story on Carrie, which De Palma had really liked. And, it just was all very easy and slam dunk kind of thing. And so unfortunately, Fred had promised us a cover story on The Fury. And then the issue got postponed because of the Star Wars coming out, and they did a big double issue on Star Wars, and The Fury got postponed. And then The Fury opened, and Fred Clark, the editor of Cinefantastique, saw The Fury and did not like it, and decided to pull the cover. And so again, here I thought, oh no, I've promised the cover to De Palma. He's gonna blame me. It's gonna be terrible. And even worse than the Phantom of the Paradise screening and you being canceled and stuff. But no, he was, he knew I didn't have control over it, and it was fine. But it also kind of made me skittish about trying to mix being a journalist on film while also working in the film industry and all of the sort of conflict of interests and everything else. And it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. So I kind of, after that, put all the journalism aside for decades until Richard Clemenson, the editor of Little Shop of Horrors magazine, came to me and asked me if I wanted to write about Frankenstein, the True Story, which was a favorite film of mine, 2-part NBC miniseries in the 70s. And that sort of got me back into writing about films. And so I've been kind of doing that as a labor of love thing on the side between gigs, and really, really, really enjoying it a lot.
Ted's been telling me about Frankenstein, a True Story, so I want to get into the reason I wanted to do Fury in particular. It goes to the editor's reaction to the movie, and I don't know. I know you were quoted as saying you were a little disappointed when you first saw The Fury. Ted, I don't know what your original reaction was, but you've pointed out other stuff that, like, for some reason, this film kind of has fallen through the cracks between maybe not so much, or between Carrie and maybe Blowout or something like that, or Dressed to Kill. But
Yeah.
I was late to seeing this. I saw it after I moved from Evansville to Austin. We were always reliant on what was available at the video stores, and it was not available at the video stores in Evansville. And I was pretty blown away by it. I mean, especially, I mean, I still to this day think that ending is one of the greatest endings of a movie ever. And
Can I say that my first De Palma film probably was Carrie. I don't think the early underground type stuff never played here, or if it did, I didn't see it. Didn't see Sisters. Saw Carrie. Of course, I was in high school, blown away. We jumped out of our seats at the end and all that stuff. And I was noticing the camera work, and I was like, wow, this is some really interesting stuff going on here. But it was the Fury for me that solidified my De Palma obsession.
Okay.
I didn't see Obsession either. I knew it was out in the theaters, but I didn't see that. But I saw it in college, finally. Caught up to it in college. But Fury, I just thought the Fury was so cinematic. So there were so many set pieces. That just blew me away, that I go, I love this guy. I'm going to follow this guy. I'm going to try to figure out more about him. And that's what the Fury means to me. It was more of consolidating my fanship for him. So.
And I mean, I didn't want to characterize your reaction to the movie. That was saying, like, what you said was your initial reaction, and you seem like you've changed your mind about it since, too.
I appreciate it much more. I mean, it's really tricky when you work on a film.
Right.
Judge it objectively when you see it, because you know what was going on set and that day and every scene, and you know what was cut out, you know what problems there were, just every little thing. It's just hard to be objective. So it was the first time, because it was the first film that I'd ever worked on. So it was the first time I was seeing a film that I actually watched being made. And it was a very bizarre experience. And it was just impossible to be objective. So I really had no idea what I had. It was just, I didn't know how to judge it. And see, when I saw Carrie, oh my God, it blew me away from, the get-go. And it is still my favorite De Palma very day. I just absolutely love that film from beginning to end, and just think it's just perfect. And I didn't have that feeling when I was watching The Fury. It was just such a different emotional experience watching The Fury, because I just couldn't see it objectively. So it's only been in recent years, when I've gone back to revisit it, where I've been able to see it for it as a movie, and I definitely appreciate it a lot more. I will say that audiences at the time, I mean, it was a disappointment box office wise. They thought it was going to be much bigger, and audiences at the time and critics at the time were not all on board. I don't think it touched people quite this. Well, it definitely didn't touch people quite the same way that Carrie did.
Yeah, it was weird for me, because I remember thinking, why is he going back to the same subject matter again? Yeah. I thought that was a very strange, but it intrigued me, but yet it kind of, like, I think a lot of us were thinking, why is he going back to the same well again? But there was it was that 1-2 punch of Carrie the Fury that, that I thought, this guy is really amazing in terms of technique and cinema of language. But the Fury.
Well, I've always been curious about this after watching Scanners. Like, I think was there a thing coming after Carrie where telekinesis was a sci-fi trope for a few years? Like, because it seems, because I think of things like X-Men was popular at the time, or the Claremont X-Men run, Austin.
Well, also it was because of the special effects of bladder special effects came along, right? Wasn't that, Sam? Would you say that all of a sudden it was like they had advanced special effects to that really amazing bladder effect, where you could do these really pulsating blow-up things, so everybody went crazy with it, And
by the way, that the design of those prosthetics was done by Dick Smith, famous for the, of course. And but when shooting was when they finally scheduled shooting to happen, he was on another film. I don't remember what it was, but couldn't actually be there on set to do the actual applications. And so they hired William Tuttle, the great, veteran makeup artist who did like Seven Faces of Dr. Lau and, just the old school, much more old school guy. And I would sit next to him in the van going to and from set every day, from the hotel to the set. And we would talk about, working with George Powell and all this stuff. It was just amazing. But he was the one applying that on Andrew Stevens. And I remember that the seam on the bridge of the nose was a real problem, and it kept coming up. It kept loosening up, especially when Andrew Stevens would furrow his brow and in acting the moment, it just kept loosening up the prosthetic glue. And De Palma would was getting very frustrated, and poor Bill, who was, rather elderly at that time, was frustrated and flustered and, wanted to do a good job. And, when everybody's watching you and time is slipping away, I just felt so sorry for him at how much, he was having trouble getting that. And it was never really perfect. And when you look at the film, when they cut to the very tight inserts of the forehead, those inserts are the fastest inserts in the history of cinema and Paul Hirsch told me, he said, well, if you look at it, we wanted people to focus on the pulsating veins. And we figured if we were on there just for a split second, that's what your eyes would go to. But if we held it any longer, your eyes were going to start to
see the imperfections.
See the imperfections. Exactly.
Well, I noticed on the end credits, you Tuttle, Rick Baker, and A.D. Flowers, all three got they're on the credit by themselves. So did Rick Baker help Tuttle, or
I was going to ask because he did the dummies, didn't he?
Yes, he was not on set at all, and I didn't do all of the shooting. They went back to Hollywood and did some sets, and some of the things like the spinning, and the explosion of John Cassavetes and all that stuff was done in L.A. and I wasn't there for that, and so I don't know. I'm probably Rick Baker was actually present for some of that stuff, but the vast majority of the film was shot on location in Chicago, and that's what I witnessed. And the only special effects makeup guy was Bill Tuttle, who was on set.
So were you there the days of the slow motion Gillian's escape? Were you there for those days? To me is the centerpiece of that film, and that's probably the one scene that just grabbed me so immensely.
I cry every time I see that sequence. It's just the most heartbreaking moment. And Carrie Snodgrass she was exactly her character in real life. She just was the most ethereal, most genuine, sweetest person. And oh my God, that moment I'm getting a little verklempt just talking about it. It's just such a heartbreaking moment in that film. Absolutely.
Well, it's also like just a technical marvel too, because it's just like I've heard De Palma talk about, and it's a key to his set pieces where a lot of times he'll, it's a lot of slow motion, it's very clear geography of what's happening, but it's also very silent. Like one of the cool things I love in that sequence is when Kirk Douglas first shoots his gun, you hear the sound, and then when he shoots the guy that's trying to take Amy Irvin away, you don't hear the gunshot. And he always says it was trying to give space for the composer to do some work.
Yeah,
it's such a ballsy moment, though, just to take that sequence and just keep it at slow motion.
Right.
I mean, even Sam, even Peckinpah, I don't know, could we pull something off this
different
romantic?
Sam.
Yeah, but it's just
when people talk about, De Palma's some of his set pieces are operatic. This is the perfect example of that. I mean, it's just the music, the slow motion, the ballet of it all. It just takes you into a whole nother realm that not many filmmakers have mastered the way that De Palma was able to do that kind of thing. And when he was on fire doing that stuff, some of those sequences were just absolutely incredible. And you think about even Dressed to Kill, the whole museum sequence, no dialogue, and it's all this great Pino Donaggio cue and just all the steady cam and visuals and everything. I mean, I saw Dressed to Kill 2 or 3 years ago at the Egyptian Theater here in LA, when Nancy Allen was there for a Q&A and everything. That sequence ended, the museum sequence, it got a humongous applause from the audience. I mean, how many times are you in a movie when people spontaneously break out in applause
in the middle of a movie? Yeah,
in the middle of a movie for a sequel. It's just, yeah. I mean, those moments are incredible.
I don't get people who don't like it. One sequence that I always point out is that no one ever talks about is the Black Dahlia staircase sequence. Like he's been doing this throughout his career, and like they all seem to be like there's the great set piece that's the reason for the movie.
I mean, I got to when I was in college, I got to a point. I said, if you love cinema, you got to love De Palma. I mean, that's what I thought. I mean, I might be naive by saying that, but
people. The haters, like, oh, he's ripping off Hitchcock or whatever. And I'm like, well, I love Hitchcock and I love seeing, reinterpretations and, all the.
And the next step, the next evolution of Hitchcock. I think he took that language, like he says, he takes the language of Hitchcock and expounds on it and expands on it and lifts it up and goes with new directions for it.
You know what I noticed this time watching The Fury that I never noticed before, because going through this movie, it seems like there's almost no Hitchcock until the very end when Robin falls or it's the two deaths at the end. It looks like Jimmy Stewart falling in Rear Window.
Yeah. Oh, completely. It's and there's no question that De Palma was thinking of that moment with the hand, the hand slipping away and everything. Absolutely, North by Northwest,
okay. And Vertigo too.
Yeah, but yes, you're right about Vertigo, but also I think it's that moment in North by Northwest at the
Mount Rushmore,
Mount Rushmore, where Cary Grant is trying to, where he's reaching down to hold Eva Marie Saint and pull her up. I mean, I think it's both, and it's anyway. Some of the weird things that happened during the shooting, and when you mention that moment, it reminds me of it. There was a very strangely scripted moment where when Kirk Douglas falls and he's on the ground, I
think I know what you're going to talk about. This is great.
So John Cassavetes, and I watched him shoot it. John Cassavetes comes up and is looking down at him, and there are these, low angle camera looking up at Cassavetes, and Cassavetes, high angle looking down at Kirk Douglas, and Kirk Douglas just gives the finger to Cassavetes, and then Cassavetes gun, and then just point blank, just blam, just shoots him. And when it was screened, I don't think we had test screenings per se, but I remember there was a screening with, few people there, and people just howled with laughter. And it ended up being cut out. They cut out the flipping of the bird, and if I'm not mistaken, they cut out Cassavetes actually shooting him.
That's definitely gone. That's definitely gone too.
And but if you look really closely, there's a shot of Cassavetes where the smoke from the barrel of the gun is streaming up.
Okay.
So next time you see it, look for that. I mean, I think it's under the frame. I don't think you see the gun, but there's a little trail of smoke coming up.
Okay.
And that's what remnant of.
Maybe it's just smoke from the room. That room was smoky whenever he was up there.
Yeah.
No.
And but it was just as I was watching him shoot that, I was having stifled giggles, and I just thought, I don't know if this is going to work to have him actually flip a bird at him at this really dramatic moment. It just seemed comical to me, and oddly enough, there was a moment in a Hammer film called Horror of Frankenstein, which is an absolutely dreadful movie. It was the one time they didn't use Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein. They went younger and cast Ralph Bates, and it was Jimmy Sangster was directing it, and they added in some darker humor and stuff to it. And the whole tone of it didn't work at all. And there's a moment in there where a severed arm that they've got hooked up to electrodes or whatever in the laboratory comes to, they're bringing it to life, and it comes to life, and then it flips a bird at Dr. Frankenstein. And in England, that gesture isn't what they do. In England is they do the V.
Okay.
And so they shot it both ways. So the prints that were released in England had him doing, up yours, and then the bird for the American prints. And it was just one of those moments where I was just like, oh my God, this is the all-time low of Hammer films. Can they go any lower and any sillier than this? And so when I was seeing, Kirk Douglas flip this bird, I kept thinking of that moment and just going, oh no, this just can't be happening. And thank God it got cut out. I never said a word to De Palma. I never opinion, but secretly inside, I was just like, oh, thank God.
Part of the reason I think the two deaths in going back to the operatic part and just having a little bit of tragedy, like it for me, it always sets up the ending, because like my first viewing, the ending, you're like, that seems like excessive, and then the punctuation mark. But when you get to Casavetti's death, I counted today. So there's two takes they said they did, and there was like 6 or 7 cameras, but I counted 13 shots of the same explosion action in a row. Oh, it's so great. And John Williams' music during it too. Just
yeah. Oh my God.
Speaking of John Williams,
it's right up there in the top work, I think.
It's always been the reason I was really drawn to this, just because like it's his follow up to Star Wars and Close Encounters.
And I thought he was, I could tell I think he's channeling or homage to Harriman.
Totally.
But he makes it his own.
It's
more so than something like Family Plot, where it doesn't. Yeah.
So then, do you, Sam? Do you have any recollection that maybe was John supposed to go on and do more De Palma films, or he couldn't get Pino and Back for the Fury, or what happened there?
Was John Williams too expensive?
John Williams, A, was very expensive, and B, was just unavailable. I don't know exactly what happened, but I just don't think he was available anytime that De Palma was, maybe thinking of using him again.
Well, did Brian want to use Pino again from Carrie?
He after The Fury, then we did Home Movies, which was very low budget. We did that in the summer of '78, and that was when I had just graduated. De Palma called me up and said, I know you're graduating. Do you want to come up and work on this low budget film we're doing this summer? And I'm like, yeah. and I thought I was just going to be an assistant again, like I had been on The Fury. And I get there and he goes, you're going to be the associate producer and production manager because we can't afford anybody. So we're going to hire you to do that. And so he I guess just trusted me and threw me into the deep end to see if I could swim. And I guess I did okay, because then after that, he hired me on as his full-time assistant to work on a whole bunch of projects in development that didn't get made, but Dress to Kill and some and Blowout and other stuff that did happen. But on Home Movies, because it was so low budget, there's no way he was going to get John Williams, but he got in touch with Pino and asked Pino to do the score and do it very cheaply and everything, and Pino was happy to do it. And that's when I met Pino, because he flew in from Italy and did the spotting session, which for those who don't know is when you sit down with the director and watch the film, stop and start and figure out, okay, the music cue is going to start at this particular frame and they're going to end at this frame, and what we want to highlight, and what stings you want for a scary moment, or whatever it is. And so he really loved working with Pino again on that, and I don't think there was any question when Dress to Kill came around. It was just Pino was going to do it.
So maybe you think I remember thinking when John Carpenter got to do a big budget film, The Thing, he hired Morricone because he had the money to hire Morricone. So I'm wondering if Brian, because he had a big budget, he hired John because he could afford him. Because I was looking at the De Palma documentary, just him to talk about the Fury, and he said I think one reason he did this movie was they came to him and he said, "Oh, this is a nice budget, big stars. Sure, I'll do it." It was not not worried about the same subject matter, so he had more money to play with.
He would have been drawn to another telekinesis, project, but since obviously Fox wanted to cash in on Carrie, and who better to go to than De Palma? I think it was that they came to him. I think he was very flattered that he was now being approached by a major studio to do a major studio film. It hadn't happened to him. The only major studio film he'd ever done was Get to Know Your Rabbit,
right?
Which
he got fired from.
And so, this was his sort of come up. I mean, it was his way of having his revenge against Hollywood, who treated him so badly, and had forced him to do all these, to go scrounging around, begging for money and doing little independent, smaller films. So, a big studio comes to you and they want to do this big thing. And I mean, I think he was, very, very happy to say yes to that.
It's sort of like Sergio.
I mean, big money.
Everything's like Sergio.
I gotta bring a Leone reference, but I think he wanted to go on and do the gangster film after Good, Bad, the Ugly, but Paramount says, do it here. You can do anything you want, but do a Western again.
There are more directors than Sergio Leone.
Well, I know, but I'm saying it's kind of that scenario where
the commerce and
same
the art.
subject matter. I mean, same genre, but you can do
what
anything
they want
want.
you to want, the one for them as opposed to the one for you.
Yeah. So anyway, that just makes me think of that.
Sam, I wanted to ask you, going back to home movies real quick, what were your interactions, or did you overlap with Mark Romanek?
Yes, I did. In fact, I met Mark Romanek on The Fury.
Wikipedia said he was on The Fury, but I thought he went to Sarah Lawrence or something. So I thought it was strictly he started on home movies. That's interesting.
He lived in Chicago. That's where he's from.
Okay.
And he was another De Palma groupie, fanatic, like I was. And I don't even remember how it happened, but somehow he came from a wealthy family, and somehow I think when they were looking for locations in Forest Hills, which was the big ritzy neighborhood, somehow his family connections or something got him introduced to the right people, and he was able to come on as like an intern and worked some days. I don't think he was there as many days I don't think he was there every day like I was when we were shooting in Chicago, but he was there on the day that we did the old Chicago amusement park, because I remember I handed him my camera and said, "Here, I want to get a picture of me talking to De Palma." And there's a talking to De Palma that Mark Romanek took with my camera.
Nice.
And he was a nice guy, and then when De Palma was teaching a course at Sarah Lawrence College in the spring of '78, De Palma had a treatment for home movies. He had the class. Each student worked on different scenes throughout the semester, and by the end of the semester, they had basically written the entire screenplay, and De Palma had sort of polished it and everything, and now they wanted to do a film of it and do it very down and dirty, low budget, and they were going to use students from the course that he had taught at Sarah Lawrence College. They were going to use those students as members of the crew and shoot it at Sarah Lawrence College and get, free locations and stuff. And so they were going to use some professionals on the crew, like the DP was a professional DP, and but mix it in with sort of student and non-union people and whatnot, and do it as down and dirty as they could. And so De Palma called me in, and then he also called in Mark Romanek because he remembered him as a guy who was smart and wanted to be a filmmaker and all that kind of stuff. And so Mark came in from Chicago to work on it that summer, but he was not part of the Sarah Lawrence students.
Okay, I got that part wrong. Well, I always found it fascinating from home movies that, like, Keith, you worked with Keith Gordon a lot, obviously, between this and Dressed to Kill, but like those two great filmmakers came from this too, on top of you too. So,
and Keith and Mark hit it off, and they partnered together on collaborating on
Static.
Static, exactly. And so that's how that all came about, was on home movies where they met and worked. I think there was other things that they worked on besides Static, or at least developed things that may not have gotten off the ground. I forget exactly. And but then Mark definitely went out on his own and was not involved in Dress to Kill, and I stayed on as De Palma's full-time assistant after that.
I thought one interesting thing was Kale. Pauline and her.
I was going to end with some Pauline.
Oh, okay.
Quote,
Well,
so but if you want to go ahead.
Well, no, this one quote, which was interesting, because you said, Sam said there is some Hitchcock, and you didn't really see much Hitchcock, right? And I thought it was interesting that she goes, no Hitchcock thriller has ever been so intense, went so far, or had so many classic sequences. That's what she said about The Fury.
Well, I think that you could sort of compare, I guess, the Kirk Douglas character to, say, a Cary Grant character in North by Northwest, where you get sort of all caught up in this big, secret conspiracy that's going on, the big MacGuffin or, whatever. And it just seemed, I think that when people are thinking of connections to Hitchcock, it is more in that vein of North by Northwest or Man Who Knew Too Much or things of that nature. But yeah,
maybe he hides it better in this one.
Like,
you just mean the espionage aspect to it?
Aspect of it. That's what was very different than Carrie, is that, Carrie was very much, teens, high school, coming of age kind of thing. Whereas this is a big espionage thriller, with the telekinesis aspects to it, but it's a whole different genre in that regard. And
it's interesting too. They said that some of the reviews at the time were having problems with the narrative, just keeping track of it. But watching it, maybe I
don't know. Is it keeping track of it or keeping why things?
But actually, if you watch it several times, it all makes sense. And there's like an agency within an agency,
right? And
what they're doing and why the school's here. It's all there.
I read some reviews before going into this and tried to understand what they were talking about. And there's certain things that bombed, like the fact people touching Amy Irving inconsistently made them bleed, stuff like that.
Yeah, well,
especially with the way Kirk Douglas's character treated her after a certain point, when he smacked her
right.
and stuff like that. Like, that's an intensive, stressful thing. Shouldn't something happen from that? But even then, I was just like,
I think her powers evolving,
right?
And she hasn't got it under control. So you could justify it going being in and out in terms of her power.
But there's also a kind of, I remember at the time thinking, this was one of the things that really bugged me. If they can levitate, how could Andrew Stevens fall to his death? Things like that.
Well, isn't that a suicide then? Or does that make it more of a suicide?
Yeah, I guess.
I guess is the perfect response to that.
I also thought in the movie too, there's some.
That's the ticket.
I thought also because he's in a big budget film, did you get a sense that he's actually doing kind of big budget Hollywood things? Like I noticed in the alleyway, that guy taking out the trash, he gets hit twice, and there's like I'm like that's big time Hollywood humor.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really Brian's humor, and I was thinking maybe he actually was tailoring it a little bit for a blockbuster.
Well, isn't that hotel the same hotel they shot in the Blues Brothers? I know the Blues Brothers is later, but that's kind of a joke you would have in that movie there too.
Yeah,
was that? Yeah, I mean, the whole production was just a big. Can I say it? A little overblown, kind of, a big Hollywood movie.
Yeah,
and I think De Palma was just having fun playing in that sandbox. He hadn't been able to really play much in that world, and the script, he hadn't written the script, so I don't know. I would think that those, trash can chase scenes and everything were probably mostly kind of in the script. So, the script writer was probably doing his own sort of homages to Hollywood, big budget Hollywood chase scenes and whatnot. And De Palma reading it probably just said, "Oh, this is fun. I'll get to experience that, making that moment."
Was it in Kirk Douglas's contract to have his shirt off and show what shape he was in at that age?
That I don't know, but yeah, I mean that there were also moments like that I find a little cringy at the time. I don't know. It was, I have come to appreciate it, but I don't find it to be the perfect.
Well, the one I always point out or think about, it really is the last one, was his escape from the hotel. To use the quote from The Wire, that is some Spider-Man shit there.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Brian himself says in the documentary that was done on him recently, where he said, "It's not one of my favorite. It's kind of down."
See, and when I watched it in the documentary, I was like, I don't agree with you, man. It's you got the ending.
Yeah, and I think it's got its own charms. I mean, it's just, you have to get into that world. I mean, I think when audiences went to see it and when critics went to see it, they were expecting Carrie. And it's so completely not. It's so completely in its own international thriller, world. And I think it just took people by surprise. I don't think that they really. And also look at the poster,
Oh my God, that poster is so cool.
It's cool. It annoyed me that it wasn't the actors. It's just two models, shadow with the light behind them and stuff. But it doesn't in any way tell you that this is going to be this big international thriller. I mean, it doesn't emphasize Douglas, or doesn't emphasize, it's basically emphasizing two teens with telekinesis, and that really feels like a sequel to Carrie. It's
it does feel like a Polish film a poster or something like that too. It's very artfully done, but maybe not evocative enough to all the elements of the movie.
Yeah, they could have done an old school poster like Frank McCarthy or McGinnis drawing it, where you had Douglas running and the teens on the levitating,
shirtless.
Yeah.
Yeah,
explosions. That would have, because you're right. It just, I think Fox wanted. They're probably trying to think Carrie, and people got there and goes, "This isn't Carrie."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing, him having a budget, I think that's always one of the things that I've loved about De Palma movies, because he's someone that doesn't seem like the money's going to go into making the camera float in a cinematic way.
He needs a budget, to do what he wants to do. I also another thing fun about the film is all the actor, all the little people that you get to see in this thing, like Charles Durning on his way up, Daryl Hannah and her little bit.
Her first performance.
Gordon Jump as the kidnapped father, and the
Dennis Franz.
And Dennis Franz. It's a lot of fun just going through that, in that regard.
And, not necessarily on its way up, but Bill Finley is in there.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't even, can you see Jim Belushi on the beach at all? I guess
I
his
saw it
face.
in Wikipedia. I didn't see it in the movie.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
just didn't notice.
that day, and I remember meeting him and thinking, God, he looks so much like his brother. and that was cool. And there was another SNL connection, that Fiona Lewis, who, by the way, I was a huge fan of because she had been in Dr. Phibes Rises Again.
Yeah.
Been in the Jack Palance Dracula that Dan Curtis did, and she had been in Listomania, Ken Russell, and she had a small part in the Fearless Vampire Killers, the Polanski film that I'm absolutely bonkers for. So, I mean, I was as excited meeting Fiona Lewis as I was Kirk Douglas. In fact, maybe a little bit more. And she at that time was dating Buck Henry. And Buck Henry came to visit Chicago for a few days, and they were hanging out at the hotel and stuff. And I got to meet him a little bit, and he was fantastic. And he wasn't a regular on Saturday Night Live, but he had hosted, and he was
like a regular host. And this would have been after like Heaven Can Wait too, so he's really at the high point too.
I mean, he was just a very really considered a great comic figure at that time, and so it was really fun to meet him. And
Sam was the guy running in the running suit in the slow motion sequence. Isn't that J. Patrick McNamara?
Yeah.
Isn't like he in a lot of those guys' movies, like Spielberg's and
he Counters and some other stuff. Yeah, he was kind of a repertory player in that whole group.
Yeah, I thought I was like also not turning around. He's in a Spielberg. He's over here in Emilius, maybe or whatever. It's
Sam, I wanted to ask you. You interviewed Casavetti's. What was Casavetti's like on set? Just because I've always pictured. You said he was full energy. He was putting it all into there. But Casavetti's famously is doing these roles to pay for his movies. You'd seem like it'd be easy to phone this in, but he doesn't. When he does these roles, he's not. It seems like
no. He was totally professional and intense and took it very seriously. He was not phoning it in any way, shape, or form. But he, was very open when I interviewed him about his motivation, that he definitely used the money he made on these kinds of movies to fund his own films. And so he was very clear and very, very matter of fact about that. And I don't think it was a secret to De Palma or anyone else. But he definitely, gave it his all and was, it was very much, giving the best performance one could give. I don't think it was a genre that he particularly took seriously.
That was what I was going to ask too about, just because it seems like this is not a movie he'd want to go see.
No, definitely not. Okay. And so, he would take it very seriously when the camera was rolling, but between shots, he would have, he would kind of be laughing at things or, just kind of like, are you kidding me? Or, and definitely in that moment when Kirk Douglas is flipping him the bird, I don't think either one of them were totally on board with that moment. I hear any discussions they might have had privately with Brian, but they were kind of, rolling their eyes a bit.
Was it easy to talk to John and Kirk for your magazine article, and were they accessible?
They were very nice. They were totally professional. Kirk Douglas, man, he was incredible. The very first day he walked onto set, we were shooting at the mansion, and he it was in that living room scene where he jumps over the coffee table and everything. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was his first day. And
your glass removal story is amazing too, by the way.
Yes, that coffee table. They removed the glass, and he really wanted to do his own stunt. And they So they didn't want him to break the glass and hurt himself. So they took the glass out of the table and just balanced like some of the tchotchkes or tchotchkes around the edges. And if you really look at it at that moment, once when the glass is removed, it looks really silly that everything that was in the middle of the table is now all balanced on the edge of this frame of a table. But at any rate, he went around the set and introduced himself to every single crew member, including me, and asked our name and what we were doing. And then the next day, he came onto set and went around and shook everybody's hand and said, "How you doing, Sam? How you doing, Joe? How you doing, Mark?" Whatever. He remembered everyone's name and made a point of that. And the crew were, every jaw was dropped. This never happened to them ever. And it made such an impression on me that I do the exact same thing on every film I direct. I go around the first day and learn everybody's name. And at the end of every day, I go around and shake everybody's hand and call them by name and thank them for the work that they've done. And it was all because of that lesson that Kirk Douglas taught me. Everybody feel like they were respected. It made everybody feel like we were part of a family. We were all in this together, making this film. There was no hierarchy. It was incredible. And I loved him for that. And I just thought it was just an amazing thing to do. And he didn't have to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to remember everybody's name, to do that. And the fact that he took the time to do that was just so impressive, and I will never forget it. And then working with him again on home movies, he was fantastic and did the same thing and was just great to everybody. Was so such a father figure to all of us young kids and students and everybody that were working on that film, mixed in with professionals, and there was no attitude about it. He was just thrilled to be working and glad that everybody was, wanted everybody to have a great time and to be part of the team. And which is very different than De Palma, I will say. I mean, De Palma does not kibitz or hang out with the crew, or, I don't think he would know everybody's name, for instance. Department heads or people that he's having to deal with directly, he would, but the grips and electrics and people that he wouldn't normally interact with, probably there just wasn't that sort of connection at all.
I think one last question I wanted to ask about, after Dressed to Kill, he kind of pushed you out of the nest to a certain extent to get you to make your own movies?
Yeah. I worked on pre-production of Blowout, and then at the same time, Charlie Loventhal was one of his students at Sarah Lawrence College when they were writing home movies. And Charlie had written a coming of age script called The First Time and wanted to direct it. And he came from a fairly wealthy family, and they were going to put up half of the budget. The budget was about $400,000, and they were going to put up a couple of $100,000, and they needed to raise the rest of the money. And De Palma was kind of advising him on it as a mentor, advisor, or whatever. And De Palma came to me and said, "Hey, Charlie wants to make this film. He's got half the money. Why don't you produce it and see if you can raise the rest of the money and then produce it? And it could be shooting at the same time that Blowout is happening. And I'm not going to be able to, be there all the time or anything. And you'd be great. You'd be great to team up with him to do this thing." So I I organized a meeting, or I got a meeting with Bob Shea at New Line Cinema and went in, and it was a slam dunk. we asked for 200,000 and he gave it to us. Like, okay, that's not how this normally happens, but okay, good. And De Palma laughed and said, I knew I had picked the right person for this. And so I went off and produced that movie. And unfortunately, it was shooting the exact same time as Blowout, because I would have loved to have been on Blowout during the shoot. But yeah, we'd made that. And in the cast was Wendy Jo Sperber, who was kind of a same as William McNamara, was kind of this repertory player that was being passed around. She was in 1941 for Spielberg. She was in I Want to Hold Your Hand for Robert Zemeckis.
Used Cars also.
Yeah, Used Cars. And I just absolutely loved her. And Nancy Allen had starred with her in both I Want to Hold Your Hand and 1941. And so I went to Nancy and I said, is there any way you could put in a good word for us? Because we'd love to have Wendy Jo in the first time. And she said, of course. And just called her right up and said, oh, you got to come do this movie. And so she was in it. And it had Wallace Shawn and Catherine Damon from Soap. And Tim Choate was the lead. And it was just a really fun little coming of age comedy. I went absolutely nowhere. New Line Cinema released it, and De Palma was going to be getting an executive producer credit. But Bob Shea, when he put up half the money, said, I want to share executive producer credit with De Palma. And De Palma did not want to share the credit. And Bob Shea would not relinquish or have separate cards or anything else, and it turned into a standoff. And De Palma just said, screw it, don't credit me as executive producer, give me a credit as creative consultant, which was just a ridiculously not very important credit. And I was pissed off because I really wanted De Palma's name on there as executive producer. And it'd be like Spielberg, executive producer on the Zemeckis film or something. I want that cachet, but it just ended up being creative consultant, and the film didn't make any money, and whatever. So although it's a cute film, and I wish it would be rediscovered and come out on Blu-ray or something so people could see it. It's really hard to even find. And then. I could have gone back to work for De Palma, but I had brought in my best friend Gary Hill to be a second assistant on Dress to Kill for certain days when De Palma always wanted me to be on set with him if anything came up. But there was always things that needed to be picked up at his office, mail, or things to be taken to the bank, or just whatever. And so when on busier days we would bring in my friend Gary Hill to be a runner, kind of to be able to go offset to do things. And so when I left during pre-production of Blowout to go work on producing the first time, then Gary Hill stepped up into my position to be his assistant on Blowout. And that worked out very well. He was very happy with Gary. And so Gary ended up continuing as his assistant on, the subsequent films after that, a few of them. And then I could have gone back, but I didn't really want to go back, to be an assistant. I had now produced a film. It was even a little weird to be the associate producer and production manager on home movies and then follow that up with being his assistant on Dress to Kill. It felt like a little bit of a stepping, backwards a little bit in terms of responsibility and whatnot. So now that I had actually had a full-fledged producing credit on the first time, I just felt like I need to really move on. And and I wanted to direct. So I wrote, directed, and produced a short film called Double Negative. It was a 20-minute comedy that I shot on 35 millimeter. And it starred Bill Randolph, who had played the taxi cab driver in Dress to Kill. There's two taxi cab scenes. There's one where Angie Dickinson is making out with the guy in the back. Not that one, but the one when Nancy Allen is in the back. and he brings her to Columbus Circle in New York, and he gets out, and then Bobby, the killer, is coming up alongside of the cab, and the cab driver is looking in the side view mirror, and just as she gets there, Bill slams the door open and knocks her down. So that guy, and he was also in Friday the 13th Part 2 and stuff. He was the lead in my short film. And then Bill Finley, who was the Phantom of the Paradise and the Mad Doctor and Sisters, and had been in a small part in The Fury, is also in it. Wayne Knight, who was Newman on Seinfeld and was in Jurassic Park, and Basic Instinct was in it. And also Justin Henry, the little boy from Kramer versus Kramer. So I had this really cool, for this little tiny short film, a pretty cool cast. And that got a lot of buzz. It got selected for Sundance. It was nominated for an award at the Chicago Film Festival, and it ended up opening. I had shot it in 35 millimeter because I really wanted it to play in movie theaters, and it did. It opened in Los Angeles with After Hours, the Scorsese film.
Oh, wow.
And in New York, it opened with Emerald Forest, the John Boorman film, and it got reviewed in the New York Times by Janet Maslin, and she gave it a really nice review. And so I parlayed all of that into getting my first feature film off the ground, which was Guilty as Charged. And that was with Rod Steiger and Lauren Hutton, Heather Graham, Isaac Hayes, Zelda Rubinstein, etc. And so... yeah, I mean, and by the way, my short film, De Palma let me use his editing room in between projects, and he was very helpful in, looking at it, giving me, feedback and things like that. So it was all great, and it was very friendly, moving out of the nest and moving on with my career. When he and Nancy Allen divorced, however, I kind of got lumped in with the Team Nancy side.
To use the Curb Your Enthusiasm team thing.
Yeah. And, Nancy's a much more personable sort of person. We were always very close, and, I gravitated to her on a much more intimate friend level. And so, yeah, it just a lot of times when people get divorced, their friends sort of get split up in the divorce, and that's what happened. And ever since then, I've just not really been in touch with him, and we just drifted apart and didn't really keep in touch at all. There was no ill will or any kind of falling out. It just drifted, and then I did a show. My second film was a Showtime whodunit thriller that starred Nancy, and so I got to actually direct her. And so I'm sure if De Palma was even aware that happened, and I'm not even sure he was aware of it, but if he was, he would have thought of me as pretty much in Team Nancy camp. So.
In Paul Hirsch's book, it wasn't a divorce, but he has a kind of similar story, although they ended up coming back together after a certain point. Like, when the books are written, they're still they're talking now, but there was a period where he couldn't pinpoint a reason, but they just stopped talking after a certain...
Yeah, I mean, I think that, all kinds of reasons why those things happen, but, yeah, and, Paul, I think that with Paul, they had such a great collaboration. But then when Paul did Star Wars and just became, this just A-list editor, I think there were a couple times when Brian asked Paul to do a movie and Paul was busy, doing Empire Strikes Back or, whatever else. And I think Brian was maybe a little bit hurt, or, that his guy that he had kind of discovered, I guess you would say, or that they were they were pretty much a team on all of those earlier films. That his guy, his allegiance had slightly shifted, and was, oh, so you're doing these bigger budgeted films or whatever. And I could see Brian a little, a little hurt by that. I don't know if that's how Paul would describe it, but that, as an outsider looking in on it, that's how I always felt.
It must be pretty nice to go from Paul Hirsch to Jerry Greenberg, though, for Undressed to Kill, though. So
yeah, it was not it was definitely not slumming. Should have to go for sure.
What is on top of your directing projects? What's the future of your film writing right now?
Well, let's see. Oddly enough, the fanzine that I did, Bizarre, I am collecting all those interviews that I did in those magazines and putting them in a book, where I'm writing about all the anecdotes of getting the interviews and what it went on behind the scenes, in addition to interviews themselves. And it's going to be a very funny book. And I'm also getting a great cartoonist friend of mine, Dan Gallagher, to do some amusing drawings and to do a funny sort of Jack Davis, Frank Frazetta-esque caricature for the cover that'll be really fun. And I haven't announced this anywhere, but I think the name is going to be I was a Teenage Monster Hunter. How I Met Christopher Lee, Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and all, something like that, and just make it fun and kitsch, but also have some really cool vintage interviews.
Well, I was going to ask. I thought this is a time and day to, because everybody's doing this. Put together an omnibus of your fanzine run, but you're going to say what you're doing, I guess, is going to put together the fanzine run, but note it with annotations to it.
Yeah. The thing that I will not be doing what you're saying, and here's why. Half of those issues, about half were devoted to the interviews, but the other half were devoted to reviews of horror films. And I am so embarrassed by my teenage writing, my teenage opinion.
Okay. Fair enough.
My embarrassing, lack of. I mean, we didn't have the ability to look things up on IMDb, and just like, oh God, it's just too embarrassing. I can't do it. If people want to pay to find those fanzines, on eBay and search the world for copies of them, fine, have at it. But I'm not going to contribute to the spread of those horrible, embarrassing reviews. So yeah, I am cherry picking the good stuff.
Okay.
And putting that all together in this book.
All right, as promised, I wanted to close with the quotes I had cherry picked from Pauline Kael's review of The Fury. She's asked if The Fury might be De Palma's Wild Bunch. And she quoted that De Palma has a jazzy willingness to appear crazy or campy. But then she details that the visual rhythms outpace the story. And at one point she says that, at least in this movie, and this is to remind you, Pauline Kael's De Palma reviews were typically, this is something, the greatest of all time, something, the greatest in cinema history, is very littered in all these reviews, including this, The Fury. But she says, at least in this movie, he's not a great storyteller. He's careless about giving the audience its bearings. But De Palma is one of the few directors in the sound era to make a horror film that is so visually compelling that a viewer seems to have to enter a mythic night world.
Wow.
So
Pauline definitely had a thing for Brian. There is no question. It's amazing. Her reviews of his stuff always flabbergast me. But yeah, I mean, I can see what she's getting at in a way. I think that the story, the basic, just flat out storyline of The Fury is very pulp and very comic booky a bit. It's just, and it's episodic. It's very, I don't think
set piecey.
I mean, you can almost say that this is a Marvel mutant movie. These are mutants.
That's why I mentioned X-Men earlier. I thought about the Claremont John Byrne run.
Yeah,
very, very much in that genre, and so it can be appreciated and enjoyed on that level, but I think it's just was so starkly different than Carrie. I just think people were, Kale's was one of the few reviews that even took it seriously, to be honest, from what I recall. It just was kind of dismissed. Audiences just weren't prepared for what they were going to see. And it makes a huge difference how a film is set up in people's minds, but it's set up in critics' minds.
Right.
That lesson, when I did have a job for a few years in between my short film and getting my first feature off the ground, because I had to have some kind of work and I needed to pay off the credit cards that had paid for my short film. And so I was working in marketing for film companies, and we released a film called The Fourth Man, the Paul Verhoeven film.
Oh, okay.
We saw it at a film festival, loved it, we picked it up, and we started having early press screenings for magazines that have like a 3 or 4 month lead time, and the critics were not getting the movie. And then all of a sudden, David Anson in Time magazine wrote, it showed at another festival or something, and he did like a festival roundup, and he flipped out about The Fourth Man and called it a wickedly funny comedy. And it was like a light bulb going off. The critics that were seeing it did not understand that it was dark humor. They were taking it too seriously and not getting it. So I just emblazoned that quote on the front cover of the press, the press notes and for all the press screenings. And from that moment on, literally every review of the movie was ecstatic, and it gave permission for the critics to walk in and smile at the dark humor of this film, and it changed everything. And I think that if The Fury had been more cleverly marketed or more honestly marketed as to what it was, that maybe audiences and critics would have gone in with a completely different mindset. But they were all going in expecting Carrie too.
Mm. Well, let's just hope the podcast like this, for someone who has gone through this entire spoiler-filled podcast, if they're going to watch this for the first time after this, we've properly framed the movie for them. So,
yeah.
Sam, Irvin, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, loved it.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Sure thing.